10 years. That's the gap in life expectancy that already separates, today, the richest from the poorest in many countries. Now imagine that gap becoming 30 or 40 years. Because for the first time in history, serious scientists are saying, out loud and at major conferences, a sentence that until recently was forbidden in laboratories. Aging may, one day, be partly reversible. I'm not talking about anti-wrinkle cream or an internet promise. I'm talking about a real paradigm shift in science, where aging stops being treated as an inevitable fate and starts being studied as a process that might be slowed and perhaps partly reversed. There are already clinical trials testing compounds that clear old cells from the body, and the first results, though preliminary, have excited the whole field. Let me be clear, now and for the entire video. I won't recommend any treatment, supplement, or medication, and nothing here is medical advice. That's a matter for you and your doctor, anchored in serious science. What belongs to this channel is a question almost nobody is asking, and that's more explosive than the science itself. If one day it becomes possible to buy years of healthy life, who will be able to pay? Because the greatest inequality in human history may be about to stop being about money and start being about the body itself. And it begins with a quiet turn in medicine. To understand what changed, you have to see how medicine always worked. Throughout history, medicine fought diseases one by one. Cancer here, heart disease there, the memory problem over there. Each treated as a separate enemy. But there's an uncomfortable observation behind almost every great disease of adult life. The biggest risk factor for nearly all of them is the same, and it's age, cancer, heart disease, neurodegeneration. They all spike as the body ages. This led a growing number of scientists to a provocative idea. What if, instead of fighting each disease separately, it were possible to target the thing underneath all of them, which is the aging process itself? It's a profound shift of target. Instead of patching the fires one by one, trying to change what makes the body flammable with age. Careful, and this is fundamental. This is a research frontier, not finished medicine. There is, today, no proven pill that reverses aging, and anyone promising that is selling an illusion. What exists is a shift in scientific perspective and some promising clues. But that shift in perspective alone reorganizes everything, because it changes the question from how long we live to how long we live well. And to understand that, wait, because you need to know a strange kind of cell. Let me explain. Simply, one of the most studied ideas in the field, with no jargon and, again, no recommendation. As the body ages, it accumulates a kind of cell that scientists informally nicknamed zombie cells. They're cells that stopped working properly, but refuse to die as they should. They sit there, taking up space, and, worse, releasing substances that inflame and harm the healthy neighboring cells. It's like having, on a team, players who no longer play and still get in the others' way. The hypothesis driving much of current research is simple to state. What if it were possible to identify and remove these dysfunctional cells, leaving the healthy ones in peace? The compounds that try to do this are among the most tested today, and there are clinical trials underway, some showing encouraging signs in age-related conditions. But notice the necessary caution, which science itself demands. Preliminary results in small studies are not proof that it works at scale, nor that it's safe for just anyone. The path from scientific promise to proven medicine is long, and it's full of ideas that seemed revolutionary and didn't pan out. I'm telling you the hypothesis, not selling you the cure. And there's an even broader way of seeing aging, and we'll get to it shortly. Here lies the most important distinction of this episode, and it speaks directly to our episode on the 100-year life. There's an enormous difference between lifespan and healthy lifespan. Scientists call the second one healthspan. The years you live with autonomy, energy, and clarity before decline. What good is living to 100 if the last 20 years are dependence and illness? The real target of the new science of aging, and this is what makes it interesting beyond the sensationalism, isn't necessarily to make you live more years. It's to compress the bad period at the end of life, stretching the good years. It's to reach 90 still doing the things you love, and have a short decline at the end, instead of a long decay. Notice how this goal is more sober and more sensible than the fantasy of immortality. Nobody serious in the field is promising eternal life. That's a salesman's line. What's realistically sought is more health in the years we already have, and maybe a few more healthy years. And here's the turn that transforms a health question into an explosive social one. If the healthy years become something science can extend, then health stops being only luck or lifestyle and becomes, in part, a product. And every product has a price, and every price, however, creates a queue. Before going on, I need to give you a compass so you don't fall into a trap, because this is one of the most hype-infested fields there is. On one side, there's serious, peer-reviewed, cautious science, making slow and real progress. On the other, there's a giant industry of promises, miracle supplements, sky-high clinics, and influencers selling eternal youth. The two use the same words, and it's easy to confuse them. The practical rule to protect yourself is simple. Distrust anyone selling a ready-made solution today, especially if it's expensive and promises a lot. Real science speaks in probabilities, in trials underway, in maybes, and in we need more studies. The salesman speaks in certainties and in miracles. When you hear someone claim there's already a remedy for aging on sale, you can be almost sure it's the second type. I'm careful to mark this, because a video about aging reversal could easily become an advertisement, and this one isn't. What I'm describing is a promising and uncertain research direction, not a product you should rush to buy. And precisely because it's uncertain and just beginning, it's the right moment to think about the social consequences before they arrive. Because if, and it's a big if, the science works, it'll hit one very specific place first, your wallet and everyone's. Suppose, as a projection and not a certainty, that science really manages to extend the healthy years significantly. What that does to the economy is an earthquake. Remember our episode on the 100-year life? There, we saw that retirement and the career were designed for a body that lasted 70 years. Now imagine people reaching 90, not dependent, but active, able to work, create, and contribute. The entire financial architecture of old age, pensions, insurance, retirement age, was built assuming a final period of decline and dependence. If that period shrinks, and if people stay productive much longer, the math changes radically. On one hand, it's an economic blessing, extra decades of capable, experienced people contributing. On the other, it's a transition nightmare. Pension systems that already didn't add up, now dealing with people living healthy far longer than any spreadsheet predicted. But the most profound economic effect isn't that. It's one almost nobody dares to name, because it's too uncomfortable. If health and years of life become, in part, something you can buy, then the economic inequality that already exists gains a new and terrifying dimension. The difference between rich and poor stops being only about what you have. It becomes about how long and how healthily you live. Here's the catch. Watch why that changes everything. Here's the central thesis of this episode, and it's uncomfortable on purpose. Every new medical technology starts expensive and scarce. It's like that with every cutting-edge treatment. First it exists for the few, then, maybe, it spreads. Now apply that to therapies that extend the healthy years of life. At first, and this is almost a certainty by the logic of any new technology, these interventions will be extremely expensive and available only to the very rich. Which means that, for a period that could last decades, We'll live in a world where those with a lot of money not only live more comfortably, but live literally more years and healthier ones than those without. Inequality, which was always about possessions, houses, cars, opportunities, starts to be written into the body itself and into lifespan itself. It's the most profound form of inequality imaginable, because it touches the most fundamental thing there is: how many years you have to live. There's already, today, a difference in life expectancy between rich and poor, tied to access to healthcare, food, and environment. The new science of aging, if badly distributed, could turn that difference of a few years into a difference of many, perhaps decades. It's not a cheerful projection, but it's an honest one, and it's precisely because it's likely that it needs to be said now. Because history shows us this outcome isn't inevitable. Before all this seems like an inevitable dystopia, let history bring a counterweight, because it has a consoling pattern. Almost every great medical technology started as an elite privilege and ended up accessible to billions. Vaccines, when they appeared, were for the few. Today, they protect the whole world. What happened with antibiotics? They were revolutionary and expensive at first. They became cheap and ubiquitous. Access to clean water and sanitation itself, which added decades to human life, spread unevenly, but it spread. The historical pattern is that life-saving innovations tend, over time and with social pressure, to fall in price and rise in reach. So there's a real hope, based on historical evidence, that longevity therapies, even starting as a luxury, could one day become common. But, and this is a big but, that never happened on its own, by market magic. It happened through choices: public policy, social pressure, investment in collective health. When left only to the logic of profit, expensive technologies can stay expensive for a long time. The difference between a future where longevity democratizes and one where it becomes a wall between castes isn't in the science, it's in the decisions societies make about access. And that choice needs to start being thought about before, not after the abyss opens. But we need to look the dark scenario in the eye, because ignoring it would be naive. What if democratization doesn't happen? What if longevity therapies stay locked behind a price only a tiny global elite can pay for generations? The result would be something humanity has never seen: a division not of class, not of country, but of biology. On one side, an elite, living 120 years in health, with time to spare to accumulate power, wealth, and knowledge over a far longer life. On the other, the majority, living and aging as always. Think about what extra decades of healthy life would do for the advantage of those already at the top. More time to invest, to learn, to consolidate power, while those at the bottom keep the old clock. Inequality, which today at least resets each generation when everyone dies, would stop resetting. The powerful could, literally, stay much longer. It's a nightmare scenario, and I treat it as a warning, not a prophecy, a projection of what could happen if we make the wrong choices, precisely so we don't make them. Science fiction has imagined these worlds of rich immortals and poor mortals many times. The uncomfortable novelty is that, for the first time, this left fiction and entered the laboratories. And what decides which way the scale tips is a single variable. The variable that separates the good future from the terrible one has a simple name: access. And access isn't decided by science, it's decided by us. Collectively, three things will determine which way history falls. The first is the speed of the price drop. Every technology gets cheaper with scale. The question is whether these therapies keep getting cheaper fast, like genome sequencing did, or slowly. The faster the price falls, the sooner longevity stops being a privilege. The second is political decision. Societies can decide that healthy years of life are a basic right, as they decided with vaccines, and invest so they reach everyone. Or they can leave it all to the market, and then the wall rises. The third, and perhaps the most important in the short term, is to remember a powerful irony. Much of what protects health in old age today isn't expensive or secret. What the most established science already knows about aging well is, to a large extent, within reach of many people and not locked behind an elite price. I won't list recipes here, because that's a conversation for your doctor. But the social point is clear. The inequality of the future doesn't have to be as large as the panic suggests if societies act wisely. The abyss is possible, not inevitable. And recognizing that changes what each of us should demand and do. There's a dimension of this change that's psychological and philosophical, and it touches us deeply. Throughout history, aging and death were the one absolute certainty, the limit that gave shape to human life. Knowing that time was finite and fixed shaped everything. Religions, the urgency to live, the meaning we give to the years. Now imagine living in a world where that limit stops being fixed, where the healthy years of life become, in part, a variable you can influence. This is, at once, liberating and disturbing. Liberating because it opens the possibility of more good time with those we love, more life to do what the rush of the old clock never allowed. Disturbing because it touches the psychological foundation of existence. If living longer becomes a goal you pursue, a new anxiety can be born. The fear of dying too soon in a world where some live far longer. The obsession with optimizing every habit. The anguish of always losing years that could be gained. We already see a bit of this in the culture of extreme health optimization, which sometimes becomes a prison. The nexialist lens here is a sober reminder. Extending life only makes sense if the extended life is lived, and not merely measured and craved. More years without purpose aren't a gift. They're just more time, and that wisdom speaks to everything this channel has been saying. Now let the nexialist lens join this with the other forces of this cycle, because aging reversal isn't happening in isolation. Remember the artificial intelligence agents? One of the areas where AI advances most is precisely drug discovery and biological research. Problems that took scientists decades to solve, like predicting the shape of proteins, artificial intelligence began to solve at scale. This means aging research itself is being accelerated by AI, more hypotheses tested, faster, cheaper. The force we saw transform work is the same one that can speed up the science of longevity. And add the home robot from the previous episode. In a population that lives much longer, long-term physical care becomes essential, and it's the robot that can provide it. Look at the full picture that appears. Artificial intelligence accelerates the discovery that extends life. Robots provide the care for that longer life. And the longer life changes work, the economy, and society. The forces feed each other. It's no coincidence that everything is happening in the same window of time. They're parts of a single great transformation of the human condition. And when you see the whole, you realize the question of longevity inequality isn't a distant technical detail. It is, perhaps, the central moral question of the century we're beginning to live. Now let me do what every honest video about the future should do. Argue against my own subject, because there's a good chance that aging reversal is far slower and far more limited than the enthusiasm suggests. First, biology is absurdly complex. Aging isn't one gear. It's many intertwined processes, and touching one can throw off another. Decades of promises of imminent biological cures ended in disappointment, precisely because the body is more complicated than the models. Second, the translation record is cruel. Many things that rejuvenated mice in the lab did nothing in humans, or did harm. The path from rat to pharmacy is a graveyard of hopes. Third, it may be that there are hard biological limits to how much human life can be extended, and that we're near them. I take all of this very seriously, and that's why I've repeated the whole video that this is projection and not prophecy. But notice the asymmetry that matters. Even if radical reversal never comes, the more modest direction of extending the healthy years to some degree is already underway, and the question of access inequality already applies to what exists today. You don't need to believe in immortality for the debate about who lives well and for how long to be urgent. It already is. So in practice, what to do with all this? And I stress it with full force one last time. Nothing here is medical advice, and any decision about your health is between you and medical professionals, anchored in serious science. What belongs to this channel are the attitudes of a citizen and a thinker, not of a patient. First, learn to separate science from hype. When you hear a longevity promise, ask whether it's peer-reviewed, cautious science, or someone selling something expensive with certainties. That single skill will protect you from a lot of quackery in the coming years. Second, treat the question of access as the political matter it is. If healthy years of life are going to become a product, society needs to decide, starting now, whether that will be a right or a privilege. Whoever understands this early takes part in the decision. Whoever ignores it will simply be affected by it. Third, don't confuse optimizing health with living. The obsession with gaining years can steal the meaning of the years you already have. Care for yourself wisely, talking to those who understand, but live the life that's happening now. Aging reversal can be medicine's greatest achievement or history's greatest source of inequality. Which of the two depends less on the scientists and more on the choices society, and you as part of it, will make? And those choices start by understanding what's at stake. Before closing, let me bring to light the most uncomfortable question of all, the one that usually stays hidden under the enthusiasm for living longer. Do we really want aging to be reversed? At first glance, the answer seems an obvious yes. But think about the implications almost nobody faces. A world where people live much longer and die much less is a world that has to rethink almost everything. How so many people will fit, how new generations will have room if the old ones don't leave, how society renews itself if the same few in power stay longer. Death, however hard it is for each of us, always had a silent function in renewing humanity. It opens space, forces the passing of the baton, recycles the structures. A world of radically extended life would have to invent other ways to renew itself, and that's a civilizational challenge, not a medical one. I'm not saying we shouldn't seek more health and more years of life. We should, and it's noble to relieve the suffering of old age. I'm saying that aging reversal isn't just a simple piece of good news. It's a transformation so deep that it touches the very rhythm of human life, and it deserves to be thought about seriously, not just celebrated. It's exactly this kind of question, crossing science, economy, ethics, and meaning, that defines the Nexialist reading. And that's where all of this flows. So let me reveal what all of this really means, with no hype and no fear. It's a projection, not a prophecy. And it's not medical advice. For the first time in history, aging stopped being a fate accepted in silence and became a problem science is trying to solve. That, alone, is one of the most important turns humanity has ever lived, even if the results come slowly and incompletely. But the real story isn't the science, it's what we'll do with it. If the therapies that extend the healthy years arrive and are distributed wisely, we can live medicine's greatest achievement, a humanity that ages better, suffers less at the end, and has more good time. If they arrive and stay locked for an elite, we can create the deepest inequality that ever existed, one written into the number of years each person has to live. Both versions use exactly the same science. The difference isn't in the laboratory. It's in the choices we'll make about access, about rights, about what kind of world we want. Death was always humanity's great leveler, the one thing that equalized kings and beggars. We stand before the possibility of touching that, and touching that is touching everything. And nobody will think through those choices for you. That's why this channel exists. Let's land, because a theme this big can become pure vertigo. And I stress it one last time, with full clarity. Nothing here is medical advice or treatment recommendation. Any decision about your health is yours and your doctor's, based on serious science. What I take from this episode are 3 stances. First, cultivate the skepticism that protects. In a field full of promises, knowing how to tell cautious science from a miracle salesman is a defense worth gold. Second, treat longevity as a question of justice, not just of health. If years of life are going to become a product, the question of who will have access is one of the most important of our time, and it's decided in the public sphere, with your voice included. Third, don't postpone living while you chase living longer. Meaning isn't in the number of years, it's in what you do with them. Aging reversal is, perhaps, the most impressive and most dangerous frontier of current science, capable of relieving an ancient suffering and capable of opening an abyss between people. Which way it tips isn't written, and that's the only good news that matters. There's still time to choose. Death was always the most democratic thing there is. What we'll do with the chance to change that is the question that defines the future. You just faced it. Now it's on you. Here on Nexialist Future, we don't recap the news. We project what it means for your life. If this map served you, subscribe and hit the bell. This is the 3rd episode of a cycle on the forces redrawing life. We saw artificial intelligence become the brain, the robot become the body of the home, and now science target aging itself. Coming up next, the energy hunger of artificial intelligence, the physical limit of all this future. And tell me in the comments, would you trust a therapy that promises to extend your healthy years? Until next Thursday.